Thank you, guys. It's amazing to be here. This is my first Women's Entrepreneurship Forum, so thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be sharing the panel with these women. I've known most of these. I just met Paulina today, and it's delightful. As a lover of economics, I could say that I think the flow of money is one of the strongest indicators of change, and I think we would all agree with that. The way where we spend our money, what we spend it on, how we invest it, will always and ultimately be a reflection of what we value, I think, in aggregate as a society. So if we look at some of the trends that are happening in the funding space, it is a thrilling time to be a female entrepreneur. And I think it's a fantastic way, or it's a time for us to be talking about funding for your ventures. Now, you guys all represent such unique perspectives, and I thought we'd kick off the panel, in having you guys introduce your work a little bit, but through that context, maybe talk about what are some specific milestones that you saw in your industry or through your work that you think is worthwhile to share in terms of indicators of this progress.
Thanks so much, and it's really amazing to be back here. I was here last year as well. So I'm Ilana. I'm the founder and CEO of 21 Toys. So we design and manufacture toys that teach empathy and failure. So I always like to say that sounds really cute, but turns out that the #1 job skill is actually empathy, creativity. Oh, and thank you, Alex, for showing. A lot of people have questions. This is what it looks like. It is not a stuffed doll in a Kleenex box. They're abstract, which I get that a lot. So I think definitely as a female entrepreneur, I think now that we just had our 5-year anniversary, I'm realizing that a lot of the statistics and the information very much applies to me. So coming out of design school, I designed this empathy toy originally for the visually impaired community. And I saw so much opportunity for it as an educational tool in schools. And I did not go the getting an investor route, primarily because I was like, who am I pitching? I'm going to start an empathy company that sells directly to schools. I figured they probably would just throw me out the door. So I didn't even try for that. Instead, what I ended up doing was I took my prototypes. I got like a $1,200 artist grant when I was living in Montreal that paid for toys, a little bit of a website. So I started blogging about creativity and the future of work. And I started breaking into education conferences and would just like leave my toy on the table and then walk away. And people were like, whose is this? And I'd be like, oh, that's me. From that, those humble beginnings, a school in Ontario actually heard about our toy, called me and asked me for their first order, thanks to a TEDx talk that I'd given. So to flash forward where I'm at now, thanks to a lot of different forms of funding, I like to say we get a lot of our customers to like pay and wait. But I also was lucky enough to be able to take advantage of loans from Futurpreneur, BDC, Sheo. I was part of the first cohort ventures. That is still so instrumental in our growth right now because as I said, it's adorable and it sounds cute that we have toys that teach empathy and failure, but I actually have an incredibly, a very exciting growing customer base. So we're in all the major banks. We're actually in over thousands of schools in 45 countries. We're in over 3 MBA programs, including the Chinese University of Hong Kong. And most recently, we just trained a cohort of leaders at the Bank of Montreal. And they're going to be using our toys as part of their training with 46,000 employees. So I like to say that, yeah. So, thank you. So empathy in the banking industry is being taken really seriously. And I think because I didn't necessarily go the investor route of convincing people this would work, I went directly to the customers and asked them that we're able to grow in this way. So thanks for having me.
And those are some incredible milestones for you this year. Congratulations. Mathu.
Hi everyone, my name is Mathu. I work at a pretty large charity called World Vision. How many of you have heard of World Vision? Great, okay, so we're not an eye charity. A lot of people think that. But our focus is on child well-being across the globe. And 2 years ago, we launched our investments team when we saw a huge gap in the market for entrepreneurs, both locally and globally, that are operating in developing countries and have a very hard time finding access to financing. I would actually say probably more than entrepreneurs working in Canada. So over the last 2 years, we have funded over 200 entrepreneurs through grants and loans between $5,000 and $250,000. I would say a major milestone for us is this year we've actually started to get a lot of traction in finding co-investors and finding people to put money into our fund so we can find entrepreneurs to fund doing the work that they're doing. So it's been a pretty tough 2 years when you talk about investing in entrepreneurs that are working in Cameroon or in Palestine or in Israel. Most banks go a little, we don't really know what to do with that. So really for this year, getting money from some of the major institutions, from some governments, and some high net worth individuals and foundations has been a big milestone for us.
Excellent, thank you.
In Vancouver, I run our BC and Yukon teams for Futurpreneur Canada. So by day, I get to support young entrepreneurs that are starting their businesses. By night, I love to support women and fangirl over their amazing stories, which is why I wrote a book last year with interviews of 150 amazing ones of them, including Vicky in it. But during the day, Futurpreneur Canada is my job, and what we do is we support entrepreneurs that are aged 18 to 39 that are just starting out their business. So we're at the really early stage. We're at the stage of, I have an idea, I think I want to make it happen, I've kind of been testing it, I need a little bit of financing to start me off, I'd love a mentor to work with me one-on-one, and I'd like to get plugged into some resources. So we do the really early stage financing, and we get to support entrepreneurs. Usually we're the first source of financing beyond their own credit card, line of credit, personal money, friends and family that they get. A milestone that's really important to me that I'm really excited about is that nationally, Futurpreneur Canada funds 40% of our entrepreneurs are female entrepreneurs, and I'm really proud that in BC, we have over 52% that are female entrepreneurs. So that's something that's really awesome. Yeah. A number of entrepreneurs have gone through SHEO, both from BC and national, so it's really, really great to be able to come in at that really early stage where we know that the injection of a little bit of that early stage capital and that wraparound support to keep them going through and accessing all the other amazing resources that are out there is so important.
Because each of you represent just different demographics in terms of the types of entrepreneurs you work with, and Ilana, you came through a very different funding journey as well too. So Paulina, I was wondering if you could talk a bit about the funding journey that you most commonly see amongst entrepreneurs you work with. So this is, majority women in Canada and younger entrepreneurs, right? What's their journey like from beginning to success?
Yeah, well, the first part of the journey is a giant question mark. There's a lot of questions around what should I do, how should I do it, what is the right way to approach, do I get debt, do I get equity, but I've heard debt is really bad, I don't want to owe money, but then I don't want someone else to own my business, so how do I approach it? Maybe I'll just put it all on my credit card, but wait, I think I pay a lot of interest on that. So that's often how the really early stage looks like. And the best advice that we give an entrepreneur is that it's never too early to talk to people who are in the funding world about what your options are. The best thing you can do for yourself is to start building a relationship with people who are in the funding world. We might not be the right funding organization for you, or maybe you're not quite ready for us, but come and talk to an organization that is in this space. We're a nonprofit, so our mission is to work with you. We meet you where you're at. And so the questions we ask are, what do you need? What is your vision? What do you want things to look like in a year, 2 years, 5 years from now? Because understanding that is really critical to how you're going to structure your financing. It'll determine how much money you want to take on at what stage. You don't want to undercapitalize yourself, but you also don't want to take on too much money too soon. And maybe the equity route and a riskier investment route is right for you, but really talking to someone who can ask those kinds of questions will be really helpful in how to structure. There's no magic bullet. There's no one way, here's how it has to be. A typical route for a lot of entrepreneurs will be to first, of course, use your own capital, invest that friends and family we often see, and then we often see entrepreneurs accessing a small amount of debt, so be it through Futurpreneur or BDC, or often local credit unions will have microfinance programs that entrepreneurs can access. There's also platforms now where you can do early stage equity investment through platforms like Front Funder, or even doing Kickstarter crowdfunding platforms, and then looking as you're scaling, do equity routes. So that's kind of broad stroke, but I'd say the most important piece is to really talk to someone where you can have a conversation around what are your goals, how do you want to see things progress, and match your financing to that as opposed to the other way around.
Amazing, perfect. That's actually a great way to describe the journey. Start with the easy capital, friends and family, debt, and then build up to equity as it gets almost more risky and you give up more control. There's like that correlation. So to flip it, Mathu, you work with entrepreneurs in some of the most poorest parts of the world. And one might think that, their journeys must be so different. But I was wondering if you could share a bit, what can entrepreneurs in this room here today learn about some of the funding journeys and struggles that the entrepreneurs that you work with?
Yeah, so it's really interesting that you said microfinance from credit unions because usually you hear the word microfinance and you think about developing countries. Most of the entrepreneurs that we work with start at some stage of microfinance. And I think the biggest thing that you can take from that environment is the wraparound support that comes with microfinance. It's very informal. Microfinance is usually done in groups of 30 to 50 women. And kind of like this room here and kind of like SheEO, it's an informal version of SheEO that exists in these rural communities all across the world. So what I would say to everyone here is find your support network, make the connections here, because when you're talking to some of these women that we support in rural villages and rural enterprises, they will literally try and find funding from the person across the street or the neighbor that they buy milk from. And it usually works out. So have the conversation because you will be very surprised at the generosity and the advice that exists in this room.
That's amazing. That's a great segue to Ilana as well too, because it's perfect, because that's how you emerge, is from this community of funders and from SheEO. So yeah, share with us your funding journey.
I was raised in Winnipeg, studied in Ottawa, first started thinking about starting a business in Montreal, which is where I got that artist grant. And then it actually ended up in Toronto in a place where I knew I wanted to start a business, but I had absolutely no funds for it. And so my journey is a bit interesting, where essentially I had a really good friend who said I could sleep on our couch while I broke into those education conferences. So because I knew I'd kind of dismissed the idea of investors or even banks, really, for that matter, I wanted to prove to myself that the product that I had even had a market. So by connecting with that first school, the way that I ended up actually going into our first production run was because they said they wanted toys, and they asked how much they cost, and I said, well, they cost a few $100s to make, so it's going to be a few more $100 for you. And they said, okay, what if we bought 30? And I said, I can give you a slight discount. And then they said yes, and I said, great, can you please pay me in full and wait 6 months? And so this can't be everyone's journey. I think definitely in my industry, in my sector, because I have a physical product, because I was able to say, okay, if you ordered 30, I can make 100. But actually getting those first customers to pay and wait has been a huge part of my financial story. And so through that, at that same timing, I had applied for the Spin Master Innovation Fund through Futurpreneur and BDC funding. So ended up actually receiving a substantial 4-year low-interest loan. And similar to that, we've actually gotten microfinancing as well, so a smaller amount. Most recently, I would say SheEO was just over about 2 years ago, and that's an interest-free, incredible loan that also comes with an incredible community. So I think my funding journey was a combination of that, as well as the idea that at the end of the day, it was really about the only way this was going to exist is if we were able to sell it. And so Kickstarter was incredible. So because we launched a Kickstarter campaign, we'd use our microloans, so I think we had like $5,000. We grew the team a little bit. I'm very good at making $5,000 look like $50,000, but ended up actually launching our Kickstarter campaign, got over 400 customers, and that's how we got into 45 countries. That's how we got into Time Magazine, and that's how we really started to make our mark. But I do want to say, like, funding is really, really difficult if you don't have that friends and family network. I know that for myself, I feel we're 5 years in, I feel like I'm so behind when I look at myself and compare myself to other ventures, and I have to remind myself that not everyone got $100,000 on day one, not everyone got certain investment, and not that that's easy, but that just puts you at a different place. So one of the little anecdotes, and I'll leave it at that, is that I was introduced, I think, like a year or so ago in front of a panel as like rich and famous, like for real. So like a room of people, and then afterwards I was like, I am not rich, and I was like, I biked to this event. I was like, these aren't my pants. So these aren't my pants is actually now my new tagline. So I always like to say, like, it's really hard. And so I like to say that when you're an entrepreneur, you're like a train station for money. And so really like when like I got $1,200 and I was like, whoa, and then I waved at it and I went here to get toys, and then that came back, and then that got to customers, and then we got a larger like 10-figure sale, and then I waved at that. And so I've just been like waving at money for a number of years. And so I think that's kind of how you grow your business. And so the challenges and the kind of things I like to say, especially people bootstrapping, is it's a really smart model to prepay, get investors, spend it in a correct way, but that doesn't make it any less difficult, and it is really hard. So at the end of the day, having those support systems, like I have my sister in the city, but my family's not anywhere near me, so I really lean heavy on my community through SheEO, but also through the Center for Social Innovation, and I have a lot of couches, and I hope to be able to purchase those people couches in a few years when, you know, we're in a really amazing space, but it's really only been 5 years. I would say 2 years ago is when I started to feel like there was a bit more financial stability, so I could start actually investing in myself.
I was curious, how many in this room have used Kickstarter or thought about using crowdfunding platforms for their ventures? Quite a few. I've always found that interesting because, you know, our next question is going to be about sources of funding and who's funding female entrepreneurs. Crowdfunding is always interesting because I think of it as almost a more blind platform, right? It kind of bypasses some of the inertia in banking or VC funding and just brings it to the crowd. So I wanted to pose a question to you guys in terms of, in your experiences, who's funding female entrepreneurs? What are some of the most friendly places for women entrepreneurs to go to for funding? And alternatively, if you dare, right? Where must women maybe be careful, or in those kind of, through that lens?
You know, it's interesting that you talk about crowdfunding. What we've seen really successful entrepreneurs that come out of crowdfunding do really well is they're really able to rally their community to support them on it. So there's kind of a magic secret of you need to have a little bit of swell and momentum behind you, and then a platform like that can really elevate and take you further. Where we've seen entrepreneurs struggle on those kind of platforms is where it's used as a kind of first introduction to market, and you're kind of starting out totally fresh and green on it because you don't have that bit of momentum coming behind you. I think where we've heard a lot of entrepreneurs, for other great sources, so in BC we have things like Women's Enterprise Centre. I'm assuming there's something like that here. In Ontario, BDC has now gotten a lot more money to go to their venture capital pool, and I know they're doing really great space in that, especially in the Women in Tech program. Where we've seen a lot of entrepreneurs, female entrepreneurs, struggle is when they try to go down the angel investor route without a little bit of support and guidance, and kind of try to contact really early stage firms that are often full of a lot of older white men, and the conversations that are had there are pretty challenging, and you don't get traction, and you get a lot more no's than you maybe need to get when you're starting out, and you could use a lot more encouragement going through that process. So that's been my experience.
You've actually accessed quite a few different types of funding.
Yes.
What's your experience in terms of if you were to step back and weigh? Would you sequence it differently? You know, would you have advice for people considering the different types?
Yeah, I mean, it's always a combination of, I feel like, lucky in some ways. So I don't know if we would necessarily do it in a different order. I would say female specific. So the only funding we've gotten that's female specific is SheEO, which I'm not necessarily, I mean, I'm joking. I don't get paid to say this, but I did receive a loan. I really would encourage anyone that is able to. It is not just an incredible source of funding, but it is an incredible community. So I'm happy to speak to that also after the panel as well, what like going to the woods and negotiating for some of the loans look like, 'cause that was also pretty transformational. Well, that's one of the reasons why I was able to bring on more people on my team, why we were able to make the impact that we have now. Kickstarter for us was really great, I think, because we have a physical product, and because I'd be doing a lot of myself and my team were doing a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of connecting with our community. People were waiting for an opportunity to be able to purchase it at a more affordable rate, and in that way. Making it work is a lot of work, but it is an amazing opportunity to actually do a lot of A/B testing on your messaging. And so what I found was, I like to say that the toy used to be called the Connections toy for empathy and creative dialogue, which is super catchy. And so when we launched on Kickstarter, that made us go, okay, what should we just call it the empathy toy. And then when we started putting the video out there, the thing with Kickstarter, and I think other platforms as well, is you can actually change the text, you can actually change the video throughout the campaign. And so what's amazing is you can put it out there, and then if people are like, oh, it's only for kids, and I'm like, no, like CEOs use it, then I can go, okay, what about our messaging isn't reflecting that? So Kickstarter's amazing for that, and also just so many eyeballs. So we got into, Huffington Post, Time Magazine. They approached us because they heard about our story. So I think that was a combination of like hard work and luck and all of that, but that was an incredible source of funding for us. Essentially use whatever, I mean, I'm definitely the example, like just use whatever is available. I think what I 100% have avoided is really going into those investor meetings. Like my only experience with that early days was just when first starting my business. I remember I would ask people to go for meetings or coffee to talk about my business, and I would be like, go talk to a patent lawyer, and then end up in that meeting, and then halfway through that meeting I was like, oh, okay, this is a date.
No, thank you.
Great. Is this a date? Is this a business meeting date? Like, don't waste my time. And that's one of the biggest things that I think now I have a business, so it happens way less, but I find that in the early days especially, so much of my time was wasted on having things that I thought were meetings, but really it were just like sneaky ways for people to try to get my time.
Well, you kind of feel like you should be doing that because people are doing it somewhere out there, and it's working for someone, but that someone is wearing jeans and flip-flops and his 22-year-old.
Like the thing that like I always like to say is like there's just different audiences. Like I went to like a workshop on like how to network. And it was like me and like literally just a whole room of guys. And I was like, well, I will end up in a very different situation if I use your networking tips. Like I'm going to need another workshop for that. But I essentially, there's like, I think when I started about, like 5 years ago, there really wasn't that much discussion on it. And what I'm so excited about, especially the learning labs and just this community in general, is that we're just going to we have been doing things in a different way. And that way is working. And so for me, I just don't really participate in certain rooms where what their advice is just in no way like is actually reflects my reality.
That's it. So it got me thinking of this article I was reading. It was talking about so much of the gaps we see. It's not so much gaps in gender or race, etc. Oftentimes, it's like a gap in confidence, especially when we're talking about women versus men, etc. So your comment about accessing funding in these different types of scenarios, I wanted to see like, of the women in this room, many of them are probably holding on to certain preconceptions of what they need to do in order to access funding or what they need to do to impress investors, etc. What's like one myth? I mean, I hate that word because it's so, cliche, but what's a preconception that you yourself may have held going into this or seen those around you hold that have just been completely abolished through your journey? I'm actually going to jump in with you, Mathu.
I find that when I'm in a room with a male entrepreneur, he has a lot of confidence in pitching me a product that has no revenue yet, in selling the idea. And I think a lot of women are afraid of selling their idea. I would say don't be afraid of selling your idea. You wouldn't believe how many people come to me with the same idea over and over and say, it's the first time you've probably heard this idea. It is not the first time I've heard this idea. Yes, tell me about the revenue that you've created. Tell me about your team and the story you have, but please pitch the vision. Have the confidence to pitch the vision, because a lot of people want to hear the numbers, but we also want to hear where you go.
That's a great misconception, because women, we naturally think we need to have all the boxes checked. We have to have all the revenue in place and all the business case before we pitch, so that's great. Paulina.
Yeah, I was going along the same lines with you don't need to have it all figured out and then move forward. There's this analogy that's been used for job applications where men will apply for a job if they meet 3 out of 10 criteria, and women will apply if they meet 10 out of 10 plus know the person. And it's true, and I think we've all been guilty of it. But I think that's where, finding someone else who will rally for you, stand behind you, finding that community will help build that up. And I'm also so tired of hearing that women don't have the confidence, because I think we're all here, we're all ready, we're excited to do what we're put on this earth to do and to make an amazing impact. A lot of the systems around us have been set up to make us feel like we are not confident because of all the no's we've heard, because of how they've been set up. So I think if I can just encourage you to really feel like you don't have to have it figured out from day one. You can pursue that potential, you can pursue that idea and move forward with that, and then build people around you who will help answer those questions. That's your job. Your job isn't to answer all of them all on your own.
I just want to pop in one more thing. A lot of times I've heard women say that they try really hard not to get emotional when they're doing a pitch. I would say don't listen to that at all from my end anyway. You have put blood, sweat, and tears into your enterprise. If you happen to get emotional during the pitch, the ones that I remember are the ones where people will tell me their story and bring the emotion behind it. Recognize that the person on the other side of the table is also someone that is a human and wants to hear it. So I've heard it over and over, especially from other male funders, even within our organization. Don't get emotional, but bring that aspect to it because it brings a reality behind your story.
Ilana, you want to bring us home?
Sure. I love that you mentioned that, Mathu. I think that's so important, just having that passion behind it. And to kind of echo what Paulina said, like the idea that we don't have the confidence, I'm so happy you said that, because it's like, no, society, and like the way that I go into a room, I still actually, unfortunately, was recently in another room where essentially I had so many questions about my business. I wanted to have those conversations, but the people in the room weren't listening, and they weren't asking me any questions about my business because they decided I was a certain type of person.
They put you in a box.
They put me in a box, and so they asked me about like hobbies or whatever it was, and I was like, I'm at a business conference. I want to talk about my business model, logistics. Like I have very specific shipping questions.
How do you balance your
work-life balance? Yeah.
Tell me.
We are amazing, and we are doing amazing things, and we're here because we're working our butts off, and because we have to work that much harder, we have even more right to be in that room. And so the idea, if you're talking and you don't feel like you're worthwhile, or for me, like it took me 2 years to call myself an entrepreneur. I was like, I'm just a designer designing something to make my designs exist. And they're like, you're an entrepreneur, you build a business. And then I just, and I struggle with that too, because I'm like, yeah, I built a toy, and it's like we're in a few thousand schools, and like I don't want to come off like I'm bragging, and at the same time, people ask me if it's still a student project. Or I've had authors actually we've been in 2 books now. I have one author who interviewed me for a full day and met one of my contractors the next day and called us business partners. Awesome. And I like to say, yeah, like if I talk about my business and I'm standing next to a guy, a lot of the times it's just like, oh, are you guys married? You're co-founders? And I'm like, right. Because like no one thinks that like I started the business and like run it. And so I think for me, that can chip away at your self-confidence. Totally. So it's not that I don't have confidence. It's everyone around me is being like, oh, you can't do this, or, oh, that's not going to work. And so I actually, one of my mentors or inspirations, she's actually younger than me, and she's incredible. And she has an organization. They have like 15 employees, and she's like killing it. And I remember when we started our Kickstarter, I was like, all the teachers we tell that we're going on Kickstarter, like, when does it launch? And all my business advisors are like, this is never going to work. Don't do it. And I said, did anyone ever tell you not to run your business because it's not going to work? And she said, everybody, except for my dad, so I hired him.
Find a better room, right? Just find a better room.
Find a better room.
Find a better room.
That was incredible. So round of applause. Thank you, ladies.